Look around. You can find cars like these on AutoTrader, like that car riding your tail. Or if you're tailgating right now, all those cars doubling as kitchens and living rooms are on AutoTrader too. Are you working out and listening to this ad at the same time? Well, multitasking pro, cars like the ones in the gym parking lot are for sale on AutoTrader. New cars, used cars, electric cars, maybe even flying cars. Okay, no flying cars, but as soon as they get invented, they'll be on AutoTrader. Just you wait. AutoTrader.
Welcome to the Sportsman's Voice Roundup, your weekly look at conservation and sporting community news happening across the nation and on the Hill. Thanks for tuning in. This is the TSV Roundup. Welcome in, ladies and gentlemen, to this week's edition of the Sportsman's Voice Roundup, your weekly look at conservation news from across the nation. This week, our lead story, CSF opposes Senate push to arbitrarily sell off federal public lands. We welcome back Taylor Schmitz, Director of Federal Policy. We'll get to him in a moment. Let's see here. Sunday hunting legislation passes Pennsylvania House and is headed to the Senate. Great news there. Sport fish restoration and boating trust fund reauthorization introduced. Will Primos Invitational bringing conservation and sporting traditions together. Recapping the sporting conservation issues of the Mississippi legislative session. CSF-backed conservation funding bills receive hearing in Michigan and Wisconsin. Wyoming Legislative Committee shapes 2026 legislative priorities. And finally, CSF hosts policy briefing on active forest management, emphasizing the importance of forest industry and sportsman's community. All that and much, much more, but I would like to start with thanking Bass Pro Shops, Richard Childress Racing, and Shields, our support and sponsors for this week, the week of June 16th, 2025. Thank you so much to them and to you for tuning in. Now we'll turn to Taylor Schmitz to talk about everyone's favorite topic right now in the sporting community. I say that in jest, obviously. But yeah, we got this bill down on the Hill that's looking to offload some federal lands. We've covered this recently as far as the House version. That stuff was stripped out of there, but the Senate is pushing to add it back in and more. I'm going to let Taylor take it from here because he's going to do a far better job of telling y'all the ins and outs and all the skinny on it. Taylor, welcome back.
Yeah, Brad, always good to be with you, and I appreciate the opportunity to talk about this today. So I'll just start at the 30,000-foot level, and Congress is working on, I think, as everybody knows that's paying attention to the news right now, Congress is largely focused on moving the one big beautiful bill. And here in DC, we call it, they're working to move that through a process that we call here in DC known as budget reconciliation. And as part of the reconciliation process, one of the benefits of it in terms of if you're the United States Senate is that the threshold to advance legislation or advance the reconciliation bill is larger than or smaller than what is typically the requirement to advance legislation in the Senate, which is typically 60 votes to end the filibuster and end the cloture process. However, through reconciliation, there's a simple majority requirement of 51 votes. So what that does, it allows for typically when there's a majority between the House, the Senate, and the White House, it allows them to move some of their priorities without getting caught up in the 60 vote threshold that's typically required of the Senate. So Congress is focusing on that right now. But one of the things that they're looking at as part of that is public land disposals, which you spoke to a little bit, Fred. Um, and you mentioned that the House piece, ultimately, the House looked to do this. They looked to sell off about 500,000 acres of public lands, mostly in Nevada, but some in Utah. And we were successful. CSF put out a pretty wonky and nuanced policy position statement on that. That was about 1,500 words long and is a pretty lengthy policy position. However, it's important to recognize that this issue is not a black and white binary issue. It is very complicated, very wonky. So anyway, so we were successful in getting that language removed from the House reconciliation package. They cleared that a few weeks ago, and the Senate started working on their section of the reconciliation bill. And unfortunately, last week, the Senate Energy and Natural Resources Committee added a section to their provision of the reconciliation bill that would sell off 2 to 3 million acres of federal public lands amongst the Bureau of Land Management and the Forest Service. So we're obviously extremely concerned about that proposal and spending a lot of time and energy working to push back on that and ultimately defeat it.
Yeah, it was interesting, cruising the socials, yesterday. I noticed one of the, members in the Senate who is heavily involved in this had, responded, tweet, xed, whatever it was, but more or less tried to take on a concern of a person saying, "Well, this is a spot," a lot of folks have highlighted these specific plots, and individuals highlighting these spots, and this is where I go to do this, or where I go to do that. And the senator returned fire, if you will. And it's like, well, these lands have nothing to do with the lands you're talking about, but then offered nothing for follow up. So, um, you know, I I don't know how somebody begins to put this many acreage, if you will, number of acres together. It's like it's so monstrous, and then not, I guess, provide more context to it, because just throwing that number out there, you're gonna set off a whole population of people, and rightfully so, the concern being there. If it's not as disastrous as it sounds, you would hope someone would come out and explain their position a little more, or some bodies. Um, but if it is as onerous as it seems, like, you gotta, and again, this is a nonpartisan issue, by any, because it, like you have said in the past, these are everyone's land. So it's not just sporting community that needs to be concerned about it. It's everybody all over this nation that needs to be concerned. So, I think about that. And then also, so much of this is in the West. Having traveled out to places like Billings and Bozeman, Montana in recent years, like, I know infrastructure out there is tapped. Like, it is being pushed to the limit. So when they look and say we want to expand affordable housing, we want to bring in resources and utilities and schools, like, that all sounds great. I just wonder, not being from out there, but anecdotally seeing things as an observer, like, how could they possibly pull that off where they're water strapped, where their grid is already kind of at the brink for power? So, like, again, I'm just asking questions I think most people would want to know. Like, okay, if you're going to sell this land, how could you execute on that? And is this all for naught?
Yeah, I think everything that you raise are some of the real challenges that these Western communities are dealing with, right? You mentioned Bozeman. I think every time I go to Bozeman, I feel like it doubles in size, and that's very much an exaggeration. But every time I go out there, there's more and more and more development. That's because it's a beautiful place to live. I think one of the most beautiful places to live in the entire country. But people are flocking to move out there, right? And you have people that grew up in that area that are raising families of their own, and it's natural for towns and communities to grow, right? But with that comes challenges. And you mentioned the grid, you mentioned water, right? You mentioned energy. These are real challenges that communities out west are facing. They're also facing challenges with having land to build a fire department,
Mhm.
build a new school, build a new ballpark, what have you. These are again are real challenges that are facing the West, and part of the reason in some of these communities that these challenges are exacerbated is because they're surrounded by federal public lands, and these are lands that we all really love. Um, but there are also, again, real opportunities and real challenges for these communities out west, and they're often hamstrung because of the federal land ownership patterns. However, there's a process for us to go through and identify lands for disposal that makes sense. And one of those processes is the Federal Land Policy Management Act, which is really the guiding principle for the Bureau of Land Management, and it actually requires the BLM to identify lands for disposal. So we need to go through that process, identify those lands that are low recreational value, low biological value, where even if you did go out hunting and fishing on these things, you might not find an elk for 10
Mm.
miles because there's no habitat there, right? So that might be an area that would make sense for us to dispose of. I think the other element to this is let's talk and have those conversations with those local communities to identify, where they can build that school or where they view that they need to build that school, and in terms of tying it into the grid, getting water to it, etc., and overlaying that with some of these lands that have been identified by the BLM for disposal. So to make sure that we're getting actually at the real issue here and not just setting some arbitrary acreage cap or acreage minimum and acreage cap to dispose of federal lands like we're seeing right now. I think the other point there is there's a second program that CSF worked really hard to see permanently reauthorized, known as the Federal Lands Transaction Facilitation Act, FLTFA. Sorry, all these things are a mouthful. Um, but one of the beautiful things about FLIPA is that any land disposal, 96% of the proceeds from that sale or that disposal or exchange get reinvested into an access account. And that money is ultimately used to increase access somewhere else. So I say all of that to say, like, hey, I think there's a lot of us that could look at, a 50-acre parcel or a 500-acre parcel, near a community that has no wildlife on it. It's full of invasive species. You're not going to get out there and hunt and fish and say, yeah, we could probably sign off on selling that. But let's take this money, put it into the Flippa account, and look to buy, you know, 300 acres here that has a lot of recreational value, a lot of biological value. Oh, and by the way, there's a 5 acre or 5 acre parcel that has water access to our favorite fishing river, right? Those are the things that we should be talking about doing right now. And unfortunately, as you and I have talked about, this issue is just often made a black and white issue. You're either for or against.
Mhm.
It is not an acre here, not an acre anywhere, or it's we got to arbitrarily sell off these
No.
things. And where we're trying to come at this is that this is not a black and white issue. It is a very complicated issue, and there's real considerations. And if this is not done properly, there will be unintended consequences for our constituency of sportsmen and women.
I as you've articulated in the past with the House version and this one, reiterating that there is and can be upside by way of improving our lot. Like I think that's actually great. I've actually like have a positive outlook on that. Let's explore that, but not this way. Like really fine tooth combing this stuff, and it deserves that attention to detail. Um, I don't know if it's appropriate that this remains in a reconciliation package. It seems so many things get dumped into it, and I know the cliche is that's how business gets done down there, but and maybe this is me just being selfish. Like in an ideal world, these things are all standalone and they get the attention they deserve. And as you have acknowledged in the past, like that could take some time and it's frustrating. But again, something like this, I think, and I think I hear you saying like it deserves that scrutiny and must be so that we can improve, almost like a no net loss policy in each state. Like we're going to give something up, let's improve what we've got on the ground. And I think that's a great way to look at it. I think the community, that's not you don't look at it in a binary sort of way. We can all kind of get wins at it.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right, Fred. And you started to hit the nail on the head there with saying that a this is not something that should be addressed through reconciliation and that simple majority requirement. That frankly is a pretty quick moving process right now, at least as quick as Congress can move on things. But I think that these, as we've talked about in the past, once you lose an acre, it's more likely than not that you're not getting access to that acre again in your lifetime and beyond. So, because of that, yeah, we need to give additional scrutiny to these things. That is not to say that we are against selling or disposing of federal public lands. However, it has to make sense. It has to be low value lands, both biologically, recreationally, etc, and there's got to be a need for it, right? We can't just sell off federal lands to sell off federal lands. But if we can sell off 15 acres to put a new elementary school that the county otherwise would not be able to develop, and you'd have 80 to 100 kids in each classroom without this new school, yeah, those are the kind of things that we should be looking at and the kind of things we should be talking about and frankly supporting. But again, there's a process for us to get there, and we feel very strongly at CSF that reconciliation is not the process to get us there.
Very good. I think this is one of those situations where two things can be right at the same time. And it's just the community's got to be willing to look at it like that.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I think, I also think that we we as a community and the broader outdoor recreation conservation community needs to needs to really sit back and say, if I was in one of these Western communities and I'm having to bus my kid, 60, 75 minutes to school, and he or she's in a classroom of 75
Mm.
kids, and that exaggerating a little bit, what would we be saying, right? And we'd probably be saying, yeah, we need to look to address some of these local community needs. But again, there's a process for it. And we need to go through that process to make sure that we are not losing access for sportsmen and women in an arbitrary, undefined manner. And I think that is one of the concerns here is that we have not gone through the process to actually look at what lands make sense. We're just putting an acreage minimum and an acreage cap that we have to meet to sell off these public lands. And that's a problem. It could be 2 million acres in Utah, it could be 2 acres in Utah. And that's a really, really big problem. We don't even know what lands we're actually talking
And
about.
like so many things, Taylor, the people that are on the ground there, the agency staff, your neighbors, the people that are actually utilizing these pieces should be the ones involved and should be the ones giving input and have that opportunity because they're the resource. They can tell you what value that land has. Just your example earlier, you could have 10 acres and there's nothing but invasives on it. If you're just making broad sweeps from an office in DC, probably not giving it the just due it deserves, but that rancher or that municipal selectman or mayor or whatever could tell you damn sure, like, "Yeah, there's nothing but tumbleweeds over there, and it's serving us no purpose other than being a dusty lot." Okay, maybe we have an opportunity for everybody. I digress. It's stuff like that that the local touch and knowledge would be beneficial to this.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And, at the end of the day, as we've talked about, these are federal public lands. Regardless of where you live in this country, you have ownership over these lands. You can go access these lands whenever you choose. However, again, there are communities that are living right next to these things that are dealing with real life consequences as a result of federal land
Mm.
ownership. And I think at the end of the day, for this stuff to work on both sides of the issue, we all need to roll up our sleeves and come together and say, to your point, two things can be true at the same time. And there's a problem here on both sides, and there's needs to be a solution that meets the needs and goals of both sides.
Taylor, as always, we appreciate your perspective, your inside baseball knowledge, and the inner workings of all things on the Hill in both chambers. And we appreciate your leadership on this stuff and your balanced look at it. Because I will, I think I've said it before. Um, you can have all this clickbait out there, but otherwise, you're just kind of complaining to complain. Your your path forward and the things you've articulated and the existing processes that already exist that people aren't taking the time to ferret out, but you have brought forward. I see it taking root in other people's coverage now, and that's great to see. But that is because of you, and we're lucky to have you at the helm on that. So thank you for your talents and leadership on a very important issue like this.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Fred. But I think at the end of the day, none of this stuff gets done in a vacuum,
Nope,
right?
absolutely
And
not.
and we are a community, and we all need to be trying to address this together.
We'll leave it there, Taylor. We'll do it again real soon. Thanks so much.
Awesome, thank you, Fred.
All right, my thanks again one more time to Taylor. It is really important the leadership he's brought to, and I'm not putting everything on his shoulders, but um, if you've kept up with the press releases and our position on this, like I alluded to earlier in the conversation, we have and Taylor has been consistent on bringing these solutions and these tools that already exist to the fore, and not just rabble rousing on different social outlets just to drive drive content traffic and things like that. So, yeah, all that's good. Call your senators, call your House members. Agree, but also I think it's important to have that a bigger breadth of knowledge, and it's not just so simple as take this off, got to do that. Like there is again, I don't want to rehash what we just did for 60 minutes, but there is a way. There is potential for all sides to win on this. Now, I'm not saying everything's going to add up here and every piece of land is going to be this way, but there are there are definitely pieces that could be beneficial to all of us. So, it's just you got to take it out of its current form, and if you're going to do this, it's a standalone issue and address it as such. And we'll leave it there. So, again, thanks, Taylor, for before we move on, my weekly reminder, please follow, subscribe, rate where available. iTunes, Spotify. You can do all that. 5-star rate. You can follow. You can subscribe. iHeartRadio, you can do the same thing. They have the presets there on iHeart. You can just make the Sportsman's Voice a preset along with any of your local favorite channels wherever you live. And boom, one touch, we're there. And you're subscribing or following, that stuff will hit your home screen, never miss an episode. So we thank you for your involvement there. And those of you who have left those reviews, we appreciate it. Now more with the show. Heading to Pennsylvania, an update here on Sunday hunting. You guys have heard us reporting on this since last year. And if you're a longtime subscriber of the Sportsman's Voice, you know this is an issue near and dear to the organization's heart that's been worked on for the better part of a decade plus. At any rate, the short and skinny here is that this House bill has moved along in the process. House Bill 1431, and this was introduced by Pennsylvania Legislative Sportsman's Caucus member Representative Mandy Steele. This will remove the longstanding prohibition on Sunday hunting, as well as increase penalties for trespassing on public lands, which includes hunting on private property without written permission. Obviously, we're in great support of this, and we'd like to see it get it done. This has been kicked back to the Senate. Now, I will remind you, Senate Bill 67 was the initial piece that was being championed in the last session, had preferred language initially in this session. It was also the one we were calling attention to. Uh, both bills now have the same language. The vehicle to get this done is now the House bill. That's the one that's moving. It's passed the House. And if you remember at the end of last session in 2024, this is where it stalled out in the process. It passed the Senate, got to the House where it was never seen again, and it died on the vine. Presumably, we've cleared that hurdle where the issue was in the House. We know the Senate's going to pass it, so now we just need the Senate to take this thing up, pass it, move it along, and then let's get it to the governor's desk and let the PGC have the autonomy and the ability to make these days available as they see fit and rescind this long-standing antiquated prohibition on Sunday hunting. So many great wins on that here in the last couple sessions between Delaware, Connecticut this session, removing Sunday hunting on private property. We're still waiting for Governor Lamont's signature on that, but we feel very good about it, and others. So Pennsylvania, let's go. It is long time to do this, and then we gotta shake the trees in Massachusetts and Maine, and um, those will be a bit of work, but I think we can get there eventually. Continuing on here, this from Chris Horton. The Sportfish Restoration and Boating Trust Fund reauthorization introduced. Chris touched on this last week. So, again, I'm not going to beat up on it too much. You guys kind of already know, but more or less, we're celebrating 75 years. This thing gets re upped every 5 years. So, nice that we're having this celebration and recognizing the 75th anniversary of the Sportfish Restoration Act, Dingle Johnson, as we're getting those resolutions in all the state houses and legislatures there and bringing those to our state agency partners. It's important legislation. Obviously, it's stood the test of time for 75 years, coming after and on the heels of Pittman Robinson. So it makes sense. And this is, as Chris has said in the past, this is a very bipartisan, easy piece of legislation to move along. So despite all the reconciliation noise and attention that's grabbing, this one should be an easy uh, pass it and keep things going and keep what is ultimately the envy of the world as far as a model successful in a self-feeding operation that goes directly to our state agencies. I'll bring in this quote from our president and CEO, Jeff Crane. The Sport Fish Restoration and Boating Trust Fund, combined with fishing license sales, is the backbone of state based fisheries conservation in America. He continues, it is a highly successful funding model for aquatic resources conservation that is unique to the rest of the world. We applaud Congressional Sportsman's Caucus members Representative Dingell and Representative Whitman for their leadership in seeking to reauthorize and protect this critical program for future generations, end quote. So there you have it. Obviously, when that goes through, and it has re-upped. We'll bring in the update there. Up next, Will Primos Invitational, bringing conservation and sporting traditions together. If you guys remember at the beginning of the year, we kicked off the truth about conservation and Primos and his shotguns, the Purdy shotguns, and what that is doing for conservation this year long campaign that will culminate with the sale of these beautiful Purdy shotguns, handmade, all unique and sequentially serial numbered. It's the only collection of it and of its kind. So let's get to the heart of the matter. This is a premier event at the Omni Homestead Resort in Virginia that will take place July 18th to the 19th. That will raise funds for conservation. Join in the fight for conservation while experiencing, the thrill of world-class sporting clays with the renowned Will Primos at the Will Primos Invitational, a premier conservation and sporting event taking place July 18th to the 19th at the historic Omni Homestead Resort and Spa in Hot Springs, Virginia. This 2-day event promises to combine world-class shooting experiences with a commitment to conservation, all hosted by Will Primos, founder of Primos Hunting. From sporting clays competition to fabulous food and company, the Invitational is a unique event that won't be repeated. Spots are limited. Register today at Omni Homestead. There's a in-article link to bring you to the registration. This quote from Will: "The Will Primos Invitational is more than just a sporting event. It's a celebration of the outdoor traditions we all cherish and a chance to make a real difference in conservation." Mr. Primos continues, "I look forward to welcoming fellow sportsmen and women and joining me for 2 days of camaraderie, competition, and a commitment to upholding the landscapes that and wildlife we love. This unique, one-of-a-kind experience offers attendees to experience the best in sporting clays amidst the scenic backdrop of the Omni Homestead Resort. The itinerary includes open shooting, competitive clays, games with top prizes, bourbon tasting, and unforgettable opportunities to build meaningful connections with Will Primos and other conservation supporters. Register today as singles or couples. Again, that same link in the article. This quote from our president and CEO Jeff Crane: "The Will Primos Invitational is a unique collaboration born of like-minded sportsmen and women who are passionate about conservation." He continues, "We are appreciative of Will's personal dedication to spreading awareness about what all hunters, anglers, shooters, and trappers do for conservation. This invitational is a great opportunity to talk to Will personally and maybe even get a chance to beat him at a sport he loves, sporting clays." End quote there. Article goes on to, talk more about the truth about conservation, um, the auction items that I just talked about here at the beginning. So you can go back in time. I got a whole podcast episode dedicated to this campaign, to this fundraising once in a lifetime event with Will that we recorded down at the National Wild Turkey Federation Convention and Sports Show. So do go back and check that out and stay up to date for when you can bid on this once in a lifetime collection, never to be repeated. Moving south here, recapping the sporting conservation issues of the Mississippi legislative session. This from Mark Lance. Highlights here in Mississippi: House Bill 1103, introduced by caucus co-chair and National Assembly of Sportsmen's Caucus Executive Council member Representative Scott Bounds, would have required the state to reimburse the Mississippi Department of Wildlife, Fisheries, and Parks for revenue lost due to the passage and creation of free and discounted hunting and fishing licenses. House Bill 816, introduced by caucus member Representative Ken Morgan, would have required the state agency to develop electronic reporting of whitetail deer harvested by hunters. House Bill 1637, introduced by caucus member Representative Bill Kincaid, ensures that fines and penalties for poaching violations will now go back to conservation funding in Mississippi, upholding the public trust doctrine. And Senate Bill 2280, introduced by caucus member Senator Ben Suber, will generate an additional about $2 million in annual conservation funding for wild turkey management in Mississippi. Let's go here. In an attempt to benefit conservation funding efforts, CSF worked alongside the caucus to introduce House Bill 1103, as well as build a coalition of partners to support the effort. The primary focus of this legislation was to protect the agency's revenue from bills provided for free and discounted hunting and fishing license to certain segments of the population. While these bills are often well intended, they can cause significant funding issues, as we've talked about for a long time. Last year, alone in Mississippi, sportsmen and women contributed over $40 million through the system. The American System of Conservation Funding is what we're talking about, which included the purchasing of hunting and fishing licenses. The passage of this bill would have put Mississippi in line with several nearby states, such as Tennessee and Louisiana, where the state general fund must reimburse the agency for revenue lost due to the passage of free and discounted licenses. One of the key tenets of the North American model of wildlife conservation is to make management decisions based on the best available science. Mississippi is the only state in the United States which does not require harvest reporting of white-tailed deer. Therefore, the state agency does not have access to the best available data to ensure data to support management decisions that could positively impact the resource and future hunting opportunities. House Bill 816 would have brought Mississippi in line with other states and provided the department with additional tool to manage deer. While House Bill 1103 and 816 did not make it entirely through the legislative process this year, the sportsman's community did see a couple of notable wins. House Bill 1637 reverses a previous piece of legislation that required poaching offenders to pay restitution to the private landowner in which the offender illegally killed a game animal, which went entirely against the public trust doctrine. Wildlife is owned by the state, not by the landowner, and restitution paid by the offender should go back into the management of the resource, which is exactly what the passage of 1637 will do now. It's great. And lastly, with concerns over turkey populations dropping across the Southeast, many states are taking proactive and productive measures to ensure the overall success of their turkeys. Senate Bill 2280 created a wild turkey stamp that ensures dedicated funding for the management of wild turkeys in Mississippi. It's estimated that approximately $2 million will be generated through this new program. CSF was proud to work alongside the Mississippi Department and the caucus and our partners to support all of these efforts, and we look forward to building off the progress in future years to protect and advance Mississippi's sporting traditions for generations to come. That's great news there. If you haven't, because you guys know I'm a turkey nerd, you know I'm going to be all over this. If you haven't seen that stamp is a really cool stamp that came up with there in Mississippi, and I want to say might have been the art for our friends at Mossy Oak. They put on some of their companion pieces. So not a plug for Mossy Oak or an ad, just some gee whiz information. But as far as wild turkey culture goes and turkey nerdism, uh, those Hayes boys know what's up. So anyway, really cool stuff there in Mississippi. Heading over to Wisconsin here. This from Bob Matthews. CSF-backed conservation funding bills receive hearings in Michigan and Wisconsin. Michigan Senate Bill 276 would modernize license fees to ensure that the Michigan Department of Natural Resources is adequately funded in light of growing operational costs. Michigan Senate Bill 277 would alleviate a legislative hangup that has prohibited the Michigan legislature from reimbursing the Michigan Department of Natural Resources for lost revenue from discounted licenses. And Wisconsin Assembly Bill 315 would reauthorize and modernize the Knowles Nelson Stewardship Fund, a complementary revenue stream for Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources. I think we covered that early in the session. Last week, CSF expressed support for pieces of legislation that would ensure the respective state fish and wildlife agencies in Michigan and Wisconsin have the resources needed to manage their storied fish and wildlife resources in each state. And written testimony supporting Knowles Nelson reauthorization, CSF emphasized the importance of the fund as its supplement to the American system of conservation funding, its popularity among Wisconsinites, and the value offered by refocusing the fund towards managing habitats and access to already acquired state lands while retaining the ability to continue purchasing public lands that offer sporting opportunities. Ensuring that there is no net loss of accessible public land hunting is a priority for CSF, and this legislation serves to keep Wisconsin's land acquisition process intact. CSF also provided oral testimony in favor of Michigan 276 and 277, both in the Senate, advocating for the modest adjustment of hunting and fishing licenses to keep pace with the growing operational costs, including departmental staffing, habitat management, enforcement of fish and game laws, and the provision of public access. Even with the proposed increases, Michigan would remain one of the least expensive states for residents to hunt and fish in the Great Lakes region. Further, the package would have alleviated an unintended technical hangup that prohibited the state agency from being reimbursed for discounted licenses, even though the mechanism has been in place for decades. Reimbursing state fish and wildlife agencies from the revenue lost for those discounts is another CSF policy priority, which is probably why you hear us talk about it so much, and we're getting at it, which serves to lower participation barriers for deserving groups without sacrificing conservation funding. Thank you, Bob. Let's go over to Wyoming. Wyoming, sorry. Legislative Committee shapes the 2026 legislative priorities. This from Marie Newmiller. The Wyoming Travel, Recreation, Wildlife, and Cultural Resources Committee recently reviewed key proposals aimed at balancing increasing development with habitat, wildlife, outdoor recreation, and cultural heritage. Other topics of interest included license proposals for landowner tags, fishing guides, former residents returning home to hunt, and consideration of season based on method of take. CSF will be tracking the upcoming meetings, working with members of our Wyoming Legislative Sportsman's Caucus and our local partners as the bill proposals develop. As states across the Northwest conclude the 2025 legislative sessions, Wyoming has launched its 2025-2026 interim session with key meetings including the TRWC Committee's June 5 through 6, 2025 hearing that already happened. Wyoming's biennial budget session is held every even numbered years, starting the second Monday of February and spans just 20 short legislative days as representatives work vigorously to craft a 2-year budget. With hundreds of proposals in these fast paced sessions, interim preparations are crucial for effective policy. And the recent TRWC meeting featured updates from Wyoming Game and Fish Department and the Wyoming Department of State Parks and Cultural Resources, as well as a legislator proposal. Discussions at this month's meeting covered lodging tax distribution, industrial sitting and wildlife, landowner hunting licenses, mule deer population status update, fair chase and technology, welcome to hunt, transferable and marketable landowner tags. Getting into some of the nitty gritty on some of these things. Lodging tax distribution. Since the program began in 2021, the Wyoming lodging tax has raised just shy of $80 million for the state. Revenues, which are currently utilized by the Office of Tourism for marketing and tourism development. State parks, wildlife, and outdoor rec represents a significant portion of the tourism in Wyoming each year, and some believe that this fund could be utilized to supplement the existing revenue for the department like Wyoming Game and Fish Department. Industrial, sitting, and wildlife. As a leader in energy production, Wyoming emphasizes protecting wildlife migration corridors during solar and wind project sitting with potential compensatory fees to mitigate impacts. The landowner hunting licenses, there is an interest in addressing hunting tag distribution in units where landowners receive large percentages of available tags, up to 100% of the tags in a few instances. This issue was raised at the November WGFD Commission meeting, and discussions will continue into July in Casper. The draft regulations, linked in the article, will be reviewed at the July meeting, which will provide an opportunity for the public to give their testimony. Legislators will receive updates from the state agency and may consider other steps as well. Mule deer population status update. Boasting the third largest population of mule deer in North America, Wyoming has been experiencing a steep downturn in population, declining by almost dropped the bomb there. That's a lot, declining by 47% since 2000. That's a lot of deer to lose. Habitat degradation, development, disease, vehicle strikes, and predation are just a few of the factors impacting overall populations. Despite the issue the population is facing, the buck to doe ratio has remained strong at 32 to 100, allowing for continued mule deer buck harvest while management works continue. Bear chasing technology. Legislators began some early exploratory work on the question of hunting technology like long range rifles with advanced scopes and range finding systems. Questions that they considered as a group ran the gamut of the enforceability of any potential regulations, if the legislature should be regulating an ethics question. Hunters are familiar with the equipment ethics debate, from archery advancements to improvements with muzzle loaders. Generally, a question best resolved through outreach and education or with departments of game and fish. From a management standpoint, this conversation rather, excuse me, has boiled up to the legislature through constituent outreach and will likely be explored further at their meeting in August. Transferable and marketable landowner tags. Currently, landowner tags mentioned in the bullet above that I read to you are reserved for landowners and or immediate family. The committee heard a legislative request to consider allowing for a wider transfer pool and sale of those tags. During 2025 session, Senate Bill 118 was proposed but did not move out of committee. CSF had joined with other coalition partners in Wyoming to raise awareness of how SB 118 would conflict with public trust doctrine, a pillar of the North American model of wildlife management. Certainly, as this progresses, Marie will bring us updates on those issues. Wrapping things up, down on the Hill, Congressional Sportsmen's Foundation hosts policy briefing on active forest management that emphasizes the importance of forest industry to sportsmen's community. This on June 10th, earlier today, CSF hosted a policy briefing on Capitol Hill that highlighted forest priorities for the forest industry and sportsmen's community. With members of the Congressional Sportsmen's Caucus, more than 75 congressional staff, and key conservation partners in attendance, the Federal Forest Management and Markets for Low Value Wood policy briefing provided the opportunity for policymakers to hear directly from conservation leaders about federal legislation and programs important to enhancing wildlife habitat and forest health on federal and private working lands. Actively managing forests is essential for increasing forest resiliency, reducing wildlife risk, improving fish and wildlife habitat, increasing access for hunters and anglers, protecting communities and public in their health, and supporting the economy. As the wildfire season heats up and catastrophic wildfires increasingly threatened communities, calls to improve management on federal forests in conjunction with support for sustainable stewardship of private forests have picked up. By bringing together the forest industry and the sporting conservation community to stress mutual goals, the policy briefing is a step forward for reforming the management of federal lands and bolstering innovative markets to support the forest management supply chain. This quote from CSF Board of Directors member Brian Luma. As chair of the CSF Forestry Advisory Council, I am thrilled with today's briefing that demonstrated several conservation sectors, including the forestry industry and the sportsman's community, are all working towards the same end goal, which is sustainable, healthy forests that benefit everyone's interests, including wildlife and hunter access. CSF is working with these organizations and other conservation partners to pass the Fix Our Forest Act and establish the Forest Conservation Easement Program, among other initiatives to increase the pace and scale of forest restoration on federal public lands and prevent forest conversion to non-forest uses. The forest industry is a critical partner to the sportsman's community, as private working forests provide recreational opportunities across the country, and forest industry carries out the forest management work that creates the desired conditions for wildlife habitat and wildfire resilience, along with other conservation deliverables for watershed and forest health. Uh, Giving you a quick rundown of who all was in the room. Along with CSF staff, speakers included Ryan Bronson from Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation, Dion Nelson, Vice President of Government Relations National Alliance of Forest Owners, and Zach Bodhane, Vice President of Government Affairs, TRCP. Yeah, good stuff there. You're going to hear from John in the Q2 update that's coming out here in, well, about a week and a half. So tune in. You can hear from John directly on how that briefing went. And it's great to see that grow, that group grow, and John's ability to get out there and just do the great work that he does. So, all right, we'll put a bow on it. That's the show for this week. As mentioned, the Q2 federal policy update you can look forward to comes out on June 26th. So about a week and a half from this drop, maybe a little less. So no feature episode this week. Do go back and check out our predator management show featuring staff Maureen Newmiller, who I just read her article, as well as Mark Lance in the Southeast, and then yours truly opining about all things controversial when it comes to furry critters and more. Even the end of the show kind of got cool. Well, the whole thing was cool, but the critical thinking about marine predators and looking at seals and things like that. And anyway, tune into that. Go check it out. It's a fun conversation, one that affects everybody in every state. Some more than others, but we all have these considerations to make. And at any rate, check the show out. That's a good one. And then you can check out some of the other ones as well. More great shows to come. Some field trips upcoming over the summer that will bring you sound from. But we'll call it a show for today. Thanks as always for tuning in and hanging out with us and sharing the program far and wide and your interactions with it. We will see you guys next Wednesday. And then next Thursday for that feature podcast drop. You can look forward to it. As always, CSF is your inside connection to outdoor legislation. Until next Wednesday, we'll see you. So long. Thanks for joining us on this edition of the Sportsman's Voice podcast. Ladies and gentlemen, your support is crucial, and you can help us out right now by leaving a review, filling in those 5 stars where available, sharing this episode with friends and family, and engaging with us socially. CSF can be found on Facebook, Instagram, and X, formerly known as Twitter. Together, we can protect the outdoor sports we love and continue to keep you informed wherever you are. That's it for this week. Until next time, we'll see you later.